The nurse placed the baby on her chest and Corinne stopped breathing. She looked down at her daughter for the first time. The tiny face scrunched and relaxed. The small mouth opened in a silent yawn. And then the eyes opened. Not brown. Not the warm walnut shade that ran through her family for generations. These eyes were amber. Golden brown with flecks of green around the iris. The color of autumn leaves caught in late afternoon light. Corinne's hands trembled against the hospital blanket. She knew those eyes. She had watched them across a canvas tent in the Wyoming mountains 10 months ago. She had watched them soften in firelight. She had watched them close as sleep finally took him sometime past 3 in the morning. The nurse smiled and adjusted the blanket around the baby's shoulders. She has beautiful eyes. Bet she gets those from her daddy. Corinne could not speak. Her throat had closed completely. The nurse continued checking monitors and making notes on her clipboard, unaware that she had just named the exact thing Corinne had been running from since the moment the pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines. I do not even know his last name, Corinne whispered to herself. But now my baby has his face. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell where you are watching from and what time it is where you are at. If you are new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. The hospital room grew quiet after the nurse left. Somewhere down the hallway, another woman was in labor. Machines beeped in distant rooms. Life continued its relentless forward motion all around Corinne while she sat frozen, staring at a face that was half hers and half a man she had known for exactly 16 hours. The baby made a small sound. Something between a yawn and a sigh. Her tiny fingers curled around the edge of the hospital blanket and held on. Corinne felt tears slide down her cheeks, but she did not wipe them away. Her hands were busy holding her daughter. Her mind was busy trying to understand how one night in a storm had rewritten her entire future. She thought about him now. The man with the amber eyes. The man whose voice had been low and careful. The man who had held her like she was something worth protecting. She had left before dawn that morning. She had slipped out of the tent while he still slept, gathered her things in the gray light, and driven away without leaving a note or a number or even her last name. She told herself it was kindness. She told herself he would understand. One night. A moment out of time. Nothing that needed to be explained or continued. But the baby in her arms proved that some moments refused to stay contained. You are real, Corinne whispered to her daughter. You are here. And you look exactly like a man who does not even know you exist. The baby blinked up at her with those impossible amber eyes. Corinne made a decision in that quiet hospital room. She would name her Grace. Because this child was grace she had not earned and did not understand. And she would raise her alone if she had to. She would give her everything. She would be enough. But even as she made that promise, she knew the question would come someday. The question every child eventually asks. Who is my father? And Corinne had no answer. Not yet. But to understand what Corinne was running from, you need to understand what happened 10 months earlier. You need to understand the storm that brought 2 strangers together and the silence that kept them apart. The wilderness retreat had been her sister Dorothy's idea. You need to get out of that house, Dorothy had said 3 weeks after the divorce papers were finalized. You have been living in the same 4 walls for 6 years. Go somewhere. Do something. Remember who you were before you became his wife. Corinne had resisted. She was a librarian in a small Colorado town. She organized community reading programs and helped elderly patrons navigate the computer catalog. She did not go to luxury wilderness retreats in Wyoming. She did not sleep in canvas tents with heated floors and farm-to-table dining. But Dorothy had already paid the deposit. And Corinne could not afford to waste her sister's generosity. So she drove 6 hours north through mountain passes still patched with spring snow. She checked in at a rustic lodge that cost more per night than her monthly grocery budget. She ate dinner alone at a table overlooking a meadow just beginning to green. She felt foolish. Out of place. A woman in sensible shoes surrounded by people who owned vacation homes and spoke casually about their investment portfolios. The first day passed without incident. She hiked a short trail. She read a book by the fire pit. She went to bed early and stared at the canvas ceiling of her tent, wondering what exactly she was supposed to be finding out here in the wilderness. The storm arrived on her second night. It came in fast and brutal. The kind of weather that happens when spring refuses to yield to the calendar. One moment the sky was clear and full of stars. The next moment wind was ripping through the valley like something alive and angry. Corinne sat up in her cot as the canvas walls buckled inward. Rain began hammering the roof so hard she could barely hear herself think. Lightning flashed in rapid succession, turning the inside of the tent bright white before plunging it back into darkness. The power went out first. Then she heard shouting from the staff. Then a flashlight appeared at her door. A young woman in a rain jacket spoke quickly. "Ma'am, I am so sorry to disturb you, but your tent is in a vulnerable location. We have had 3 structures collapse already, and we need to move you to safer accommodations." Corinne was already reaching for her bag. "Where am I going?" The staff member hesitated. "There is only one space left. It is a larger tent, meant for couples. But the gentleman staying there has agreed to share. He said he did not mind who it was as long as someone got out of the weather safely." Corinne stood in the doorway of her buckling tent, rain hammering the canvas behind her, and realized she had no choice. She followed the staff member through the storm. The path was already flooding. Her shoes filled with water within seconds. By the time they reached the larger tent on higher ground, she was soaked through and shivering so hard her teeth were chattering. The staff member opened the door and ushered her inside. A wave of warmth hit her immediately. A small wood stove glowed in the corner. Lantern light cast soft shadows on the canvas walls. And a man stood near the stove, turning to look at her as she stumbled through the door. He was older than her. Mid-40s, she guessed. Gray threaded through dark hair that was slightly disheveled. A face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. He wore expensive clothes, but they hung loose on his frame, as if he had recently stopped caring about appearances. And his eyes. Amber. Golden brown with flecks of green. The kind of eyes that made you feel seen even when you were trying to hide. The staff member spoke quickly. "Mr. Mercer, this is the guest from Tent 14. Corinne, this is Arthur. I will check on you both in the morning. Stay safe and stay inside." Then she was gone, and Corinne was alone with a stranger. "I am dripping on your floor," Corinne said. It was the only thing she could think to say. Arthur's expression did not change. "There are towels in the bathroom. Take whatever you need." His voice was low and careful. Measured. The voice of a man who was used to being in control but was too tired to exercise that control right now. Corinne moved toward the bathroom, her wet shoes squelching on the floor. She grabbed 2 towels and began drying her hair, her arms, her clothes as best she could. When she emerged, Arthur had returned to his position by the stove. He was feeding it small pieces of wood, his back to her. "Take whichever bed you want," he said without turning around. "I do not sleep much anyway." Corinne looked at the 2 beds separated by a narrow aisle. She chose the one farthest from the door and sat on its edge, still clutching her damp jacket. "Thank you," she said, "for agreeing to share. Most people would not have done that." Arthur shrugged. His shoulders moved beneath his dark sweater. Most people are not stuck in a storm with nowhere else to go. They did not speak for the next hour. Corinne sat on her bed, listening to the wind scream outside. Arthur sat by the stove, feeding it wood, staring into the flames. The silence between them was thick but not hostile. 2 strangers suspended in discomfort, each guarding their own wounds. She watched his hands as he worked. They were careful hands. Deliberate. Competent. The hands of a man who was used to solving problems. But there was something else in the way he moved. A heaviness. A weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. "Why are you here?" The question left her mouth before she could stop it. She did not know why she asked. Maybe because the storm made normal social boundaries feel irrelevant. Maybe because she was tired of silence. Arthur did not turn around immediately. He finished placing a piece of wood in the stove. He closed the small metal door. Then he spoke. The same reason as everyone else. To figure something out. That is not really an answer, Corinne said. No, he agreed. It is not. More silence. The storm raged. Canvas walls shuddered. Then Arthur spoke again, quieter this time. My brother died a year ago. I have not figured out how to stop being angry about it. Corinne did not know what she expected, but it was not that. I am sorry, she said. The words felt inadequate. Everyone is. Arthur's voice held no bitterness. Just exhaustion. I came here because my assistant told me I needed to stop working for 5 minutes. I said fine. Then the storm hit. Now I am stuck with a stranger. He turned finally and looked at her. Those amber eyes caught the firelight and seemed to glow. What about you? Why are you here? Corinne's hands twisted in her lap. My divorce was finalized 3 weeks ago. My sister said I needed to remember who I was before I got married. Have you? She shook her head. I do not think that person exists anymore. Arthur studied her for a long moment. Then he said something that landed like a stone in still water. Maybe you do not need to find the old version. Maybe you just need to build a new one. Corinne blinked. She had not expected wisdom from a stranger at 2 in the morning in a storm. Arthur turned back to the stove. The conversation seemed to be over. But something had shifted between them. Some invisible wall had developed a crack. Corinne lay down on her bed, pulling the blanket up to her chin. She stared at the canvas ceiling and listened to the rain and tried not to think about how strange this was. Sharing intimate space with a man whose last name she did not know. Whose grief she could feel like a physical presence in the room. She did not expect to sleep. But exhaustion won eventually, and she drifted off to the sound of the storm. She woke to a new sound. Quieter. The rain had softened from hammering to pattering. The wind had stopped screaming. The small clock on the nightstand said 3:15 in the morning. Arthur was still awake. He sat in a chair near the stove now, a bottle of wine open beside him, a glass in his hand. He was staring at nothing. Corinne sat up slowly. The movement caught his attention. I did not mean to wake you, he said. You did not. She pushed the blanket aside and swung her legs over the edge of the bed. The storm is quieter. It is passing. Arthur lifted his glass slightly. I found this in my bag. I brought it from home. Would you like some? She should have said no. She should have gone back to sleep. But something about the night felt suspended from normal rules. Something about his voice made her want to stay awake. She walked over and sat in the chair across from him. He poured her a glass and handed it to her. They drank in silence for a few minutes. The wine was good. Expensive, probably. Corinne did not know enough about wine to tell, but she could taste that it was different from the cheap bottles she bought at the grocery store. Tell me about your brother, she said finally. Arthur's hand tightened on his glass. Why? Because you mentioned him. And because you look like you have not talked about him in a long time. He was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he began to speak. His name was Thomas. He was 4 years younger than me. When we were kids, I used to resent him. My father loved him more. It was obvious. Thomas was charming and easy and I was difficult and too serious. But somewhere along the way, that stopped mattering. Thomas became the only person in my family who actually knew me. What do you mean knew you? Arthur swirled the wine in his glass. My father believed I would never amount to anything. He told me that directly, multiple times. He said I did not have the instincts for business. He said I was too soft. When I started my own company, he predicted I would fail within a year. But you did not fail, Corinne said. She did not know anything about his company, but she could tell by the way he spoke that he had built something significant. No. I did not fail. But my father never acknowledged it. He died 3 years ago still telling people I was a disappointment. Arthur's voice was flat now. Controlled. Thomas was the only one who ever said he was proud of me. The only one who showed up when things were hard. And then he died too. What happened? Boating accident. Company retreat. He was not even supposed to be on that boat, but someone asked him to help with something, and he said yes because that is who he was. Always helping. Always saying yes. Corinne felt the weight of his grief pressing against the walls of the tent. "I am sorry," she said again. And again the words felt inadequate. Arthur finished his wine and set the glass aside. "Your turn." "My turn for what?" "Your story. Why your marriage ended." Corinne hesitated. She had not talked about this to anyone except Dorothy. The wounds were still fresh enough to sting when touched. But something about the night made her brave. Or maybe just tired enough to stop guarding herself. "He made me feel invisible," she said. "That is the simplest way to explain it. For 6 years, I was furniture. Something that existed in his house but did not require attention or maintenance." Arthur's eyes stayed on her face. "He had affairs. At least 2 that I know about, probably more. He controlled the money. He decided what we did and where we went and who we spent time with. And the worst part is that I let him. For 6 years, I let him shrink me down until I forgot what shape I used to be." "What made you leave?" Corinne looked down at her hands. "I found an email. He was planning a trip with another woman, using money from our joint account to book a hotel in Cabo. And when I confronted him, he did not apologize. He did not even seem surprised. He just looked at me like I was being unreasonable for expecting fidelity from my own husband." Arthur was quiet. "I filed for divorce the next day," Corinne continued. "He did not fight it. I think he was relieved. He had been waiting for me to give him an excuse to leave. I finally gave him one." The wine sat warm in her stomach. The confession sat heavy in the air between them. Arthur leaned forward slightly. "I spent 30 years building something my father said I would fail at. When he died, I thought I would finally feel free. Instead, I just felt empty." Corinne met his eyes. "Do you still?" Arthur held her gaze. "Not right now." The space between them felt charged suddenly, like the air before lightning. Corinne should have looked away. She should have said goodnight and gone back to her bed and maintained the proper distance between strangers. Instead, she stayed. They talked until the sky began to lighten. He told her about the company he built, about the buildings he had designed and developed, about the historic properties he was working to preserve. She told him about the library, about the children's reading programs she had started, about the elderly patrons who came in just to have someone to talk to. They did not talk about anything profound, just the ordinary details of their lives. But somehow, in the sharing of those details, something extraordinary happened. They stopped being strangers. The first hint of dawn crept through the canvas walls. The storm had passed completely now. Birds were beginning to call from the tree-line. "I should sleep," Corinne said. The words felt reluctant in her mouth. Arthur nodded. "So should I." But neither of them moved. His hand reached across the space between their chairs. Slow. Tentative. Giving her time to pull away. She did not pull away. His fingers touched hers. Warm and careful. "I do not know you," she whispered. "No," he agreed. "But I would like to." Corinne felt something crack open in her chest. Something that had been locked tight for years. He leaned forward. Slowly. Asking permission with his eyes. She answered by closing the distance herself. The kiss was soft at first. Questioning. 2 people who had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted. But it deepened quickly. 6 years of invisibility and 14 months of grief meeting in the space between them. She did not remember moving to the bed. She did not remember the exact sequence of what happened next. But she remembered his hands on her skin. She remembered the way he whispered her name like he was memorizing it. She remembered feeling seen for the first time in longer than she could calculate. And she remembered falling asleep in his arms as the sun rose, feeling safer than she had felt in years. Corinne woke to gray light and silence. The storm was gone. Birds called tentatively from the treeline. The canvas walls were still. Arthur lay beside her, one arm draped across her waist, his breathing slow and steady with sleep. She lay frozen for a long time, feeling the weight of his arm, the warmth of his body, the terrible certainty that she had done something that could not be undone. What happens now, she thought. What does he expect? What do I expect? Fear arrived in waves. Not fear of him. Fear of herself. Fear of what this might mean. Fear of opening herself up to someone and being made invisible again. She slipped out from under his arm carefully. She moved slowly, holding her breath, watching his face for any sign that he was waking. He did not stir. She gathered her clothes from where they had fallen. She found her shoes by the door. She picked up her bag from the corner where she had dropped it the night before. She stood by the door and looked back at him one last time. His face was relaxed in sleep, peaceful in a way it had not been when he was awake. The grief that lived behind his eyes was invisible now. She should wake him. She should say something. Thank you for last night. Here is my phone number. Can I see you again? But the words would not come. The fear was too loud. She told herself it was kindness. He would wake and she would be gone and he would understand. One night. A moment out of time. Nothing that needed to be explained or continued. She opened the door and slipped out into the gray morning. She was in her car before sunrise, driving south through fog, hands tight on the wheel. She did not cry. She did not look back. The drive home took 6 hours. Corinne spent every minute of it constructing walls, packing the night away in a mental box and sealing it shut, convincing herself that what happened in that tent was an anomaly, a moment of weakness, a detour from the path she was supposed to be walking. By the time she reached her small apartment in Colorado, she had almost succeeded. She unpacked her bag. She did laundry. She went back to work at the library on Monday morning and smiled at the patrons and shelved books in the quiet stacks. She did not think about amber eyes. She did not think about careful hands. She did not think about the way he said her name like he was memorizing it. 6 weeks later, everything changed. Corinne stood in her bathroom, staring at the pregnancy test on the counter. Her hands were shaking so hard she had almost dropped it twice. 2 pink lines. Clear and bold and undeniable. She had missed her period. She told herself it was stress. The divorce. The trip. The transition back to single life. Anything could throw her cycle off. But her body knew the truth before her mind was ready to accept it. She sank to the floor, back against the tub, knees pulled up to her chest. She sat there for over an hour without moving. Pregnant. By a man she had known for 16 hours. A man whose last name she never learned. The cruelest part was what this meant about her marriage. For 6 years, her husband had told her she was the problem. They could not have children because something was wrong with her. He never said it directly, but the implication was clear. She was broken, defective, unable to give him what he wanted. And she had believed him. But here was the truth in her hands. She was not broken. She had never been broken. He was the one who had failed. The knowledge should have felt like vindication. Instead it just felt like another weight to carry. Dorothy came over that evening. She took one look at Corinne's face and sat down at the kitchen table. "Tell me," Dorothy said. Corinne slid the pregnancy test across the table without a word. Dorothy stared at it for a long moment. Then she looked up. "The Wyoming man?" Corinne nodded. "Do you know how to find him?" "I never learned his last name." Dorothy's eyes widened. "The staff at the retreat. They would have records." Corinne shook her head. "I asked them not to tell me anything about him. Before I left. I made them promise not to give him any of my information either. I thought I was protecting myself." Dorothy was silent for a moment. Then she asked the question Corinne had been avoiding. "What are you going to do?" Corinne placed her hand flat on her stomach. She could not feel anything yet. No movement, no sign of the life growing inside her. But she knew it was there. "I do not know," she said honestly. The decision did not come all at once. There were nights of doubt, mornings of fear, long conversations with Dorothy that ended in tears, doctor's appointments in sterile rooms where Corinne felt utterly alone. She was 38 years old. She had just emerged from a marriage that had nearly erased her. She was starting over with nothing but a small apartment and a librarian's salary. This was not the plan. This was not anything close to the plan. But somewhere in her second trimester, something shifted. She was lying on the examination table during an ultrasound appointment. The technician moved the wand across her stomach, pointing out images on the screen that looked like nothing but blurs and shadows to Corinne. And then she saw it. A tiny shape, curved and floating, unmistakably human. "There is the heartbeat," the technician said, pointing to a rapid flutter on the screen. "Strong and steady. Your baby is doing great." Corinne stared at the screen and felt something crack open in her chest. That flutter was not a mistake. That flutter was not an inconvenience. That flutter was a life. A person. Someone who would call her mother and look to her for safety and love. She walked out of that appointment with her decision made. She was keeping this baby. She would figure out the rest as she went. The months that followed were the hardest of her life. Morning sickness that lasted well past morning. Exhaustion that made every day feel like climbing a mountain. Growing out of clothes she could not afford to replace. Working full days at the library with swollen ankles and an aching back. Dorothy helped when she could. Drove her to appointments. Brought her groceries. Sat with her on bad days and listened to her cry. But most of the time, Corinne was alone. She talked to the baby constantly. At night, lying in bed with her hands on her growing stomach, she would whisper stories and hopes and promises. "I am going to give you everything," she would say. "I do not know who your father is or where he is or if we will ever find him. But I know who I am. And I know what I am going to do. I am going to love you enough for both of us." The baby would kick in response. A small foot pressing against her palm. A tiny person saying, "I hear you." Corinne would fall asleep with tears on her cheeks and determination in her heart. She did not try to find Arthur. She told herself it was practical. How would she find a man with no last name? She had asked the retreat not to share information about him. She had covered her own tracks too well. But the truth was simpler. She was afraid. Afraid that he would reject her. Afraid that he would want to take the baby. Afraid that he had money and power and resources she could never match. Afraid that one night had meant nothing to him and everything to her. So she stayed silent. She carried her daughter alone. She prepared to give birth alone. And she hoped, somewhere in the back of her mind, that somehow the truth would find its way to him without her having to be the one to deliver it. Labor began on a quiet Tuesday evening. Corinne was washing dishes when the first contraction hit. She gripped the edge of the sink and waited for it to pass. When it did, she dried her hands and called Dorothy. "I think it is time." Dorothy was at her door in 20 minutes. They drove to the hospital through streets wet with recent rain. Corinne focused on breathing, on counting, on anything except the fear that was building in her chest. The hospital was bright and busy. Nurses moved efficiently. Machines beeped in steady rhythms. Everything was designed to be calm and clinical. But Corinne felt anything but calm. Dorothy held her hand through the worst of it. 12 hours of labor. Pain that made everything else she had ever experienced seem trivial. Moments when she thought she could not do this, could not push anymore, could not survive another contraction. And then, finally, a cry. The nurse lifted the baby and placed her on Corinne's chest. Warm and slippery and squirming and perfect. Corinne looked down at her daughter for the first time, and saw amber eyes looking back at her. The weeks after the birth blurred together in a haze of feeding schedules and sleepless nights and a love so fierce it frightened her. Grace. She had named her Grace because that was what this child represented. Unearned. Undeserved. A gift that had arrived wrapped in complications. Dorothy came by often. She held Grace while Corinne slept. She did loads of laundry and stocked the refrigerator and listened when Corinne needed to talk. "You look different," Dorothy said one afternoon. Corinne was watching Grace sleep in her bassinet. "Different how?" "More alive. Like you finally have something worth fighting for." Corinne nodded slowly. "I think I do." But even in those moments of peace, the question lingered. The question she could not escape. Does he have a right to know? She would look at Grace and see Arthur's eyes staring back at her. She would hear Grace laugh and wonder if his laugh sounded the same. She would watch her daughter reach for things with curious, determined hands and think about the hands that had held her so carefully that night. He had searched for her. She did not know this for certain, but she believed it. The way he had looked at her. The way he had touched her. That was not a man who wanted one night and nothing more. But she had not given him a way to find her. She had closed every door, locked every window, built walls so high that even someone who wanted to reach her could not. Was that protection? Or was it cruelty? Corinne did not know. The answer came on an ordinary Tuesday when Grace was 10 months old. Corinne was folding laundry in front of the television. Grace sat on the floor nearby, chewing on a teething ring and babbling at nothing. A news segment was playing in the background. Something about real estate development and historic preservation. Corinne was not really listening until a name caught her attention. Arthur Mercer, founder and CEO of Mercer Development Group, announced today that his company will be acquiring several historic properties across the Mountain West region. Corinne's hands froze on a half-folded onesie. She looked at the screen, and there he was. Amber eyes. Gray-streaked hair. That same measured voice she remembered from the tent. He was being interviewed at some kind of press conference. Cameras flashed around him. Reporters shouted questions. He answered with calm precision. Mercer Development Group is committed to preserving the architectural heritage of this region while ensuring these properties remain viable for future generations. Corinne sank onto the couch, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Arthur Mercer. That was his name. Arthur Mercer. She grabbed her phone and began searching with trembling fingers. The information came flooding in. Articles. Interviews. Wikipedia entries. Forbes profiles. He was not just a businessman. He was a billionaire. Founder of one of the most successful real estate development companies in the western United States. Known for his commitment to historic preservation and sustainable development. Reclusive in his personal life. Never married. No children. No children. The words sat on the screen like an accusation. No children that anyone knew about. Corinne looked at Grace, who was now trying to pull herself up on the coffee table. Those amber eyes. That curious determination. "You have a father," Corinne whispered. "And he does not even know you exist." She spent the next week researching. She read every article she could find about Arthur Mercer. She watched old interview clips. She learned about his company, his philanthropy, his rare public appearances. And she learned about his brother. Thomas Mercer had died in a boating accident 14 months before the night in Wyoming. He was described in obituaries as warm, generous, beloved by everyone who knew him. The opposite of his private, guarded older brother. The timeline aligned perfectly. Arthur had gone to Wyoming 3 months after losing his brother. He had told her he did not know how to stop being angry. He had told her his brother was the only person who ever believed in him. She understood now why he had been so raw that night. Why his grief had been so close to the surface. Why he had opened up to a stranger in ways he probably never did with people he actually knew. She also understood what she had done by leaving without a word. She had given him one night of connection and then vanished. After a year of losing everyone who mattered to him, she had added herself to the list of people who left. The guilt was almost unbearable. Dorothy found her crying at the kitchen table late one night. "What is wrong?" Dorothy asked, sitting down across from her. Corinne pushed her phone across the table. On the screen was an article about Arthur Mercer. Dorothy read for a moment. Then her eyes widened. "This is him? The Wyoming man?" Corinne nodded. He is a billionaire. Yes. Dorothy looked at the phone, then at Corinne, then at Grace sleeping in the next room. What are you going to do? Corinne wiped her eyes. I do not know. I keep thinking about what you said. That he might try to take her. That he has money and lawyers and power I cannot match. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then she said something Corinne did not expect. What if he is not that kind of man? What do you mean? I have spent the last 10 months warning you about rich men, Dorothy said. I have been afraid that he would hurt you or use his power against you. But I have also watched you carry this baby alone. I have watched you struggle. And I have to ask myself, what if he would have helped? What if he would have been there? Corinne stared at her sister. You told me once, Dorothy continued, that he held you like you were something worth protecting. That he asked permission before he kissed you. That he talked to you for hours about things that mattered. Does that sound like a man who would take your daughter away from you? No, Corinne whispered. It does not. Then maybe he deserves to know she exists. And maybe Grace deserves to know her father. The words hung in the air between them. Corinne looked toward the room where her daughter was sleeping. Those amber eyes. That curious face. That life she had created with a stranger who was not really a stranger at all. He had a right to know. She had known that from the beginning. She had just been too afraid to act on it. But fear had kept her trapped in a bad marriage for 6 years. Fear had kept her small and invisible and silent. She was not going to let fear make her decisions anymore. I have to tell him, Corinne said. Dorothy nodded. Yes, you do. The drive to Denver took 5 hours. Corinne left early in the morning, Grace strapped securely in her car seat in the back. She had not called ahead. She had not made an appointment. She did not know what she would say or how she would say it. She only knew that she had to see him. She had to tell him the truth. And she had to do it face to face. The Mercer Development Group headquarters was a glass and steel tower in downtown Denver. It gleamed in the morning sunlight, intimidating and cold. Corinne parked in a garage 3 blocks away and sat in her car for 20 minutes, trying to slow her racing heart. Grace made small sounds in the back seat. Babbling. Curious. Unaware of the magnitude of what was about to happen. Corinne looked at her daughter in the rearview mirror. You are going to meet your father today, she said quietly. And I have no idea how this is going to go. Grace blew a raspberry in response. Corinne laughed despite her nerves. She got out of the car, unstrapped Grace, and settled her against her hip. Then she walked toward the tower. The lobby was vast and echoing. Marble floors. High ceilings. Security guards stationed at every entrance. Corinne felt completely out of place in her simple dress and comfortable shoes, a baby on her hip and fear in her heart. She walked to the reception desk. A young woman in a tailored suit looked up at her with a practiced smile. Can I help you? I need to see Arthur Mercer, Corinne said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. The receptionist's smile became slightly strained. Do you have an appointment? No. I am sorry, but Mr. Mercer does not see anyone without an appointment. If you would like to leave your contact information, someone from his office can get back to you. Corinne shook her head. Please. Just tell him that Corinne is here. From Wyoming. He will know what that means. The receptionist hesitated. Her eyes moved from Corinne's face to Grace's face and back again. I really cannot, she began. Please, Corinne said. It is important. Something in her voice must have communicated the weight of what she was carrying. The receptionist studied her for a long moment. Then she picked up the phone. Just a moment. The call was brief. The receptionist spoke in low tones that Corinne could not quite hear. Then she hung up and looked at Corinne with new uncertainty in her eyes. Someone will be down to see you shortly. Please have a seat. Corinne sat in one of the leather chairs near the window. Grace squirmed in her lap, reaching for everything, curious about this new environment. The wait felt endless. 10 minutes. 20. 30. Corinne was beginning to think she had made a mistake. That he would not come. That the name Corinne meant nothing to him anymore. that she was a footnote in a life that had moved on without her. And then the elevator doors opened. And there he was. Arthur Mercer stepped into the lobby. He was wearing a dark suit that fit him perfectly. His hair was the same, gray streaked through dark. His face was the same, guarded and careful. And his eyes. Those amber eyes. They swept the lobby until they found her. He stopped walking. Corinne rose from her chair, Grace balanced on her hip. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The lobby continued around them. People came and went. Phones rang at the reception desk. The world kept turning. But for Corinne and Arthur, time had stopped. Then his eyes moved from her face to the baby in her arms. To Grace. To the amber eyes that were identical to his own. And Corinne watched his face change. She watched the composure crack. She watched something break open behind those careful eyes. He took one step forward. Then another. Then he was standing in front of her, close enough to touch, staring at the child who wore his face. "She is beautiful," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "Her name is Grace," Corinne replied. "And she is yours." Arthur Mercer, billionaire CEO, man of power and control and carefully constructed walls, looked at his daughter for the first time. And the certainty that had defined his entire life began to crumble. The lobby seemed to shrink around them. Arthur stood frozen, his eyes moving between Corinne's face and the baby in her arms. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The composure that had carried him through boardrooms and negotiations and a lifetime of proving himself worthy had abandoned him completely. Grace reached toward him with one small hand. Her fingers opened and closed in that universal baby gesture of wanting. "She does that when she is curious about someone," Corinne said quietly. "She does not reach for everyone." Arthur's throat moved as he swallowed. His voice, when it finally came, was rough. "How old is she?" 10 months. The math was simple. Anyone watching could have done it. 10 months since birth. 9 months of pregnancy. That put conception almost exactly at the time of the storm in Wyoming. Arthur closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, they were wet. "You left," he said. "That morning. You were gone before I woke up." "I know. I searched for you. I called the retreat. I asked for guest lists, contact information, anything. They said you had specifically requested that no information be shared." Corinne felt the weight of that revelation settle into her chest. "I did not know you would look for me." "Of course I looked for you." His voice cracked slightly. "That night meant something to me. I thought it meant something to you too." "It did." "Then why did you leave?" The lobby continued its busy rhythm around them. People crossed the marble floors. Phones rang. Elevators chimed. But Corinne and Arthur existed in their own bubble of suspended time. "Because I was scared," Corinne said. "Because I did not know who you were or what you would want or whether that night was real or just loneliness and wine. Because I had just left a marriage that made me invisible and I did not know how to trust anyone, including myself." Arthur was quiet. His eyes stayed on Grace, who was still reaching for him with curious fingers. "And now?" he asked. "Why are you here now?" Corinne looked at her daughter. "Because she deserves to know her father. And because you deserve to know she exists. I am not here to ask for money or support or recognition. I am not here to threaten you or make demands. I am just here to tell you the truth." Arthur took a step closer. His hand lifted, hesitated, then gently touched Grace's outstretched fingers. Grace grabbed his thumb and held on. Something shattered behind Arthur's eyes. A wall he had spent decades building came down in a single moment of contact with his daughter. "Can I hold her?" His voice was barely audible. Corinne hesitated. Every protective instinct she had developed over 10 months of single motherhood screamed at her to say no. To keep her daughter close. To maintain control of the situation. But she looked at Arthur's face. At the raw vulnerability she had never expected to see from a man of his power and position. At the tears he was not even trying to hide. She transferred Grace carefully into his arms. Arthur held his daughter for the first time. His hands were awkward, uncertain, clearly unpracticed with babies. But they were gentle, reverent. He cradled her against his chest like she was made of something precious and breakable. Grace looked up at him with those amber eyes that matched his exactly. She studied his face with the intense concentration that only babies possess. Then she smiled. Arthur made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. "She smiled at me," he whispered. "She does not smile at everyone either," Corinne said. They stood there in the lobby of his billion-dollar company, a man in a tailored suit holding a baby in a second-hand onesie, and for a moment nothing else existed. Then Arthur looked up at Corinne. "We need to talk," he said. "Somewhere private. Will you come upstairs?" Corinne nodded. They rode the elevator in silence. Arthur still held Grace, who seemed perfectly content in his arms. Corinne watched them together and felt something she had not expected to feel. Hope. It was dangerous. She knew that. Hope had betrayed her before. But watching this man hold her daughter with such careful tenderness made it impossible to keep her walls fully intact. The elevator opened onto a floor that was clearly executive level. Thick carpets muffled their footsteps. Original artwork hung on the walls. An assistant looked up from her desk with barely concealed surprise. "Mr. Mercer, I did not know you were expecting visitors." "I was not," Arthur said. "Hold all my calls. Cancel anything I have for the rest of the day." The assistant's eyebrows rose, but she nodded. "Of course." Arthur led Corinne to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He closed the door behind them and stood for a moment, still holding Grace, seeming uncertain what to do next. "Please sit," he finally said. "Make yourself comfortable." Corinne sat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Arthur did not sit behind the desk. Instead, he took the chair beside her, as if he could not bear to put any distance between himself and his daughter. Grace began to squirm in his arms. She was getting hungry. Corinne reached into the bag she carried and pulled out a bottle. "May I?" Arthur asked, gesturing to the bottle. Corinne hesitated again. Then she showed him how to position Grace, how to angle the bottle, how to watch for signs that she was drinking too fast. Arthur fed his daughter for the first time. His hands trembled slightly, but his focus was absolute. "You are good at this," Corinne said quietly. "I have never done this before," he replied without looking up. "I have never held a baby for more than a few seconds. I did not think I would ever have children." "Why not?" Arthur was quiet for a moment. "Because I did not think I knew how to love anyone properly. My father certainly never taught me. And after Thomas died, I stopped believing I had anything worth giving to another person." Grace finished her bottle and made a small, satisfied sound. Arthur looked at Corinne uncertainly. "She needs to be burped," Corinne said. "Put her against your shoulder and pat her back gently." Arthur followed the instructions carefully. When Grace produced a small burp, he smiled with a pride that seemed almost comical given the simplicity of the achievement. "I did it," he said. "You did." He looked at Corinne then. Really looked at her for the first time since the lobby. "Why did you not tell me sooner?" he asked. "I understand why you left that morning. I understand the fear. But you have known about her for almost 19 months. You carried her alone. You gave birth alone. Why?" Corinne felt the weight of the question pressing down on her. "At first I did not know how to find you," she said. "I never learned your last name. I had asked the retreat not to share any information about you, and that meant I could not get any information about you either. By the time I realized I was pregnant, I had no way to reach you." Arthur's jaw tightened. "And after?" "After I was scared," Corinne admitted. "I saw your name on the news a few weeks ago. I learned who you were, what you have built, how much power and money you control. And I thought about what would happen if you decided you wanted her. If you decided to fight for custody. I have nothing, Arthur. A small apartment. A librarian's salary. I could never compete with what you could offer. You thought I would try to take her from you. I did not know what kind of man you were. I only knew you for one night. One night does not tell you whether someone will use their power to hurt you. Arthur was quiet. Grace had fallen asleep against his shoulder, her tiny hand curled into the fabric of his suit jacket. "I would never do that," he said finally. "I need you to know that. I would never try to take her from you." Corinne's eyes burned. "I want to believe that. Then let me prove it." Arthur's voice was steady now. "Certain. I know I have no right to ask for anything. I know I missed the pregnancy and the birth and the first 10 months of her life. But I want to be part of whatever comes next. I want to know my daughter. I want her to know me." Corinne looked at Grace sleeping peacefully in his arms. The same amber eyes, now closed. The same determined chin. The same quiet intensity. "What does that look like?" she asked. "You live here. I live in Colorado. You run a billion-dollar company. I shelve books. We figure it out," Arthur said. "Together. I do not care about the logistics. I care about being present. Whatever that requires, I will do it." The words hung in the air between them. Promises made by countless people, kept by far fewer. Corinne wanted to believe him. But belief required evidence. And evidence required time. "I need to see it," she said. "I need you to show me, not tell me. Words are easy. Showing up is hard." Arthur nodded slowly. "Then I will show up. Tell me when and where and I will be there." Grace stirred against his shoulder. She made a small sound and nuzzled closer to him, seeking warmth even in sleep. Arthur looked down at his daughter with an expression Corinne had never seen on anyone's face before. Awe and terror and love all tangled together. "She is perfect," he whispered. "How did we make something so perfect?" Corinne felt tears slide down her cheeks. She did not wipe them away. "I do not know," she said. "But we did." They stayed in his office for 3 more hours. Arthur asked questions. Hundreds of questions. What did Grace like to eat? How did she sleep? What sounds did she make when she was happy? What made her laugh? What made her cry? Corinne answered everything. She showed him photos on her phone. The first ultrasound. Grace's first smile. Her first attempts at crawling. The birthday cake Corinne had made for her 1-month celebration because she could not afford a real party. Arthur studied each photo like it contained the secrets of the universe. "I missed all of this," he said quietly. "Yes," Corinne replied. "You did." He looked at her. "Is that my fault or yours?" The question was not accusatory. It was genuine. He wanted to understand. "Both," Corinne said. "I left without telling you my name. You did not ask for it before I left. I convinced myself that one night did not matter. You convinced yourself of the same thing, or you would have pushed harder to find me. We both chose silence. And silence has consequences." Arthur nodded slowly. "Then we both have things to make up for." "I suppose we do." He looked at Grace again. She was awake now, playing with a set of keys Corinne had given her. Her small fingers explored each key with intense concentration. "I want to start now," Arthur said. "Today. I want to come back to Colorado with you." Corinne blinked. "What?" "I do not want to wait. I do not want to schedule visits and coordinate calendars. I want to be there. I want to learn her routines. I want to be present while she is still young enough that presence matters. You have a company to run." Arthur looked around his office. At the awards on the shelves. The photos with politicians and celebrities. The evidence of decades of achievement. "I have spent my entire adult life building this," he said. "I have sacrificed relationships and health and any semblance of personal happiness because I believed this company was the only thing that would ever matter. My father told me I would fail and I was determined to prove him wrong. But he has been dead for 3 years and I am still trying to prove something to a ghost." He looked back at Corinne. "Thomas used to tell me I was missing the point," Arthur continued. "He used to say that success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. I did not understand what he meant. I thought he was being sentimental. But he was right. He was always right. Arthur stood and walked to the window. The city spread out below him. Buildings he had developed. Properties he had acquired. His kingdom of glass and steel. "I do not want to miss anything else," he said without turning around. "I already missed too much. If that means stepping back from the company, I will do it. If that means flying back and forth every week, I will do it. Whatever it takes." Corinne stood and walked to stand beside him. She looked at the view he was offering to leave behind. "You barely know her," she said. "You barely know me. How can you be so certain?" Arthur turned to face her. His eyes were that same amber she saw every day in their daughter's face. "Because I have spent 46 years being certain about the wrong things," he said. "I was certain my father's approval would bring me peace. It did not. I was certain that success would fill the emptiness inside me. It did not. I was certain that keeping people at a distance would protect me from being hurt. It did not." He reached out and touched her face gently. The same careful touch she remembered from that night in the tent. "That night in Wyoming was the first time in my adult life that I was not certain about anything," he continued. "I did not know what would happen. I did not know if I would ever see you again. I did not know what any of it meant. And for the first time, I did not need to know. I just needed to be present." Corinne felt her breath catch. "You showed up in my lobby today with a baby who has my eyes," Arthur said. "That is not something I can analyze or strategize or control. That is something I have to respond to with my whole self. And my whole self is telling me that this matters more than anything I have ever built." Grace made a sound from her carrier. A small demanding noise that meant she was tired of being still. Arthur looked at his daughter. Then he looked at Corinne. "Let me come with you," he said. "Let me try." Corinne studied his face. The earnestness there. The vulnerability. The same raw openness she had seen that night in the storm. She should say no. She should protect herself. She should maintain control and set boundaries and keep him at a safe distance. But she was tired of safe distances. She was tired of walls. She was tired of doing everything alone. "Okay," she said. "Come with me." The drive back to Colorado took 5 hours. Arthur followed in his own car. A sleek black vehicle that probably cost more than Corinne's apartment. She watched it in her rearview mirror the entire way, half expecting it to turn around. Half expecting him to change his mind. He did not turn around. They arrived at her apartment complex just as the sun was setting. Arthur parked beside her and got out, looking at the modest building with an expression she could not read. "This is where you live," he said. "Yes." "It is small. It is what I can afford." Arthur nodded. He did not offer to buy her a bigger place or suggest she was living beneath her means. He simply accepted the information and moved on. "Can I help you carry anything?" They walked up 2 flights of stairs together. Arthur carried the diaper bag. Corinne carried Grace. The domesticity of it felt strange and unfamiliar. Inside, her apartment looked even smaller than usual. Arthur stood in the living room and took in the second-hand furniture. The photos on the walls. The baby toys scattered across the floor. "She has made this place a home," he said quietly. "We have tried." Grace was fussing now, tired from the long day. Corinne began the bedtime routine. Bottle. Diaper change. Pajamas. Soft singing as she rocked her daughter to sleep. Arthur watched every step with intense focus. Learning. Memorizing. When Grace was finally asleep in her crib, Corinne returned to the living room. Arthur was standing at the window, looking out at the darkening sky. "There is a hotel 2 blocks away," she said. "It is not fancy, but it is clean." Arthur turned. "I will find it." He made no move toward the door. "What happens now?" Corinne asked. "Now I prove it," Arthur said. "Tomorrow I will come back. And the next day. And the day after that. I will learn her schedule. I will learn what she needs. I will earn my place in her life. And maybe, if you let me, I will earn a place in yours too." Corinne felt something shift in her chest. A crack in the wall she had built so carefully. Do not make promises you cannot keep, she said. I do not, he replied. That is why I am asking for the chance to prove it instead of just promising results. He walked toward the door, paused with his hand on the knob. Thank you, he said, for telling me, for giving me this chance. I know you did not have to. She deserves to know her father, Corinne said. And you deserve to know her. Arthur nodded. Then he left. Corinne stood alone in her apartment, listening to his footsteps fade down the stairs. She walked to Grace's room and looked at her sleeping daughter. He came, she whispered. He actually came. Grace slept on, unaware that her life had just changed forever. Arthur arrived the next morning at 7. Corinne opened the door to find him standing there with coffee in one hand and a bag of groceries in the other. I did not know what you liked for breakfast, he said. So I bought options. He had also brought diapers. The right size. And formula. The brand she used. And a stuffed elephant that Grace immediately reached for when she saw it. Corinne watched him move through her small kitchen, putting away groceries, learning where things belonged. You researched, she said. I stayed up most of the night, Arthur admitted. I read articles about infant development, nutrition, sleep schedules. I watched videos about how to change diapers properly. He paused. I have never felt so unprepared for anything in my life. But you did it anyway. I told you I would. The day passed slowly. Arthur learned how to feed Grace without getting food everywhere. He learned how to change her diaper. He learned how to interpret her different cries. Hungry, tired, wanting attention. He failed often, fumbled with buttons, put the diaper on backward once, nearly dropped the bottle twice. But he did not give up, and he did not get frustrated, and he did not check his phone once. By evening, he was exhausted. His expensive shirt was stained with baby food. His hair was disheveled. He looked completely unlike the polished CEO who had stood in the lobby the day before. Same time tomorrow? He asked as he gathered his things. Corinne nodded. Same time. The pattern continued. Every morning, Arthur arrived at 7. He brought groceries or diapers or small toys he thought Grace might like. He stayed until evening, learning, helping, being present. The first week was clumsy. He made mistakes constantly. Grace cried when he held her wrong. He burned dinner twice. He fell asleep on the couch during one of her naps and woke up to find Corinne watching him with an expression he could not interpret. I was not judging you, she said when he apologized. I was thinking that you look different when you sleep. Younger. The second week was slightly better. Grace started reaching for him when he arrived. She laughed when he made faces at her. She fell asleep in his arms during her afternoon nap. She trusts you, Corinne said. I do not know why, Arthur replied. I have given her no reason to. Babies do not care about reasons. They care about presence. The third week brought a test. Grace got sick. A fever that spiked in the middle of the night. Corinne called the pediatrician and was told to monitor her, give her fluids, keep her comfortable. Arthur was at the hotel when she called. It was 2 in the morning. I can handle it, Corinne said. I just thought you should know. I am coming, Arthur replied. He arrived 15 minutes later, still in his pajamas, hair wild from sleep. He did not ask permission. He did not wait to be invited. He simply walked into Grace's room and sat down beside the crib. What do you need? He asked. They spent the night together, taking turns holding Grace, checking her temperature, soothing her when she cried. Neither of them slept. By morning, the fever had broken. Grace was tired but no longer burning up. She lay in her crib, exhausted, finally peaceful. Arthur looked at Corinne across the small room. They were both running on nothing, both disheveled and worried and completely drained. Thank you, Corinne whispered, for coming. Arthur shook his head. Do not thank me. This is what being a father means. I am just sorry it took me 10 months to start. Something changed after that night. Corinne stopped waiting for Arthur to disappear. She stopped checking her phone to see if he had cancelled. She stopped bracing herself for disappointment. He was there. Every day. Without fail. Without excuses. And slowly, carefully, she began to let him in. They started talking about things beyond Grace. He told her about his company. About the historic buildings he was working to preserve. About his vision for sustainable development that honored the past while building for the future. She told him about the library. About the children's reading programs she had created. About the elderly patrons who came in just for conversation. About the small satisfactions of helping people find exactly the book they needed. They discovered they both loved the same author. They disagreed about politics but agreed about food. They made each other laugh at unexpected moments. "You are different than I expected," Arthur said one evening after Grace was asleep. "What did you expect?" "I do not know. Someone harder, maybe. More guarded. You have every reason not to trust me, and yet you keep letting me in." Corinne considered this. "I have spent most of my life being guarded," she said. "I was guarded throughout my marriage, and it did not protect me at all. At some point I realized that walls keep out good things as well as bad. I do not want to live behind walls anymore." Arthur was quiet. Then he said, "My entire life has been walls. I built them so high I forgot there was anything on the other side." "What changed?" Arthur looked toward Grace's room. "She did. You did. That night in the storm did." He turned back to Corinne. "I spent 46 years believing I did not need anyone," he said. "That depending on people was weakness. That vulnerability was a liability. But that night with you, I let all of that go for a few hours. And it was the most alive I had felt in years. When you were gone in the morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. Something too good to be real." Corinne's chest tightened. "I built my walls even higher after that," Arthur continued. "I told myself I would never let anyone get that close again. But then you showed up in my lobby with Grace, and all those walls came crashing down. And I realized I do not want to rebuild them. I want to stay vulnerable. I want to stay open. Even if it means getting hurt." "Even if it means getting hurt," Corinne repeated. "Especially then." Arthur's eyes held hers. "Because the alternative is living the rest of my life the way I have been living it. And I would rather risk hurt than go back to being that person." Dorothy came to visit at the end of the 4th week. She stood in Corinne's kitchen, watching Arthur prepare lunch with Grace balanced on his hip, and her expression was unreadable. "I did not believe it when you told me," Dorothy said quietly to Corinne. "I thought he would last a week. Maybe 2. And now?" Dorothy shook her head. "I do not know what to think. He looks at her like she is the center of the universe. He looks at you like you hung the stars." "He is trying," Corinne said. "Trying is easy," Dorothy replied. "Trying is exciting and new and makes you feel good about yourself. Staying is hard. Staying when the novelty wears off and the challenges pile up and the easy choice is to walk away. That is the test." Corinne nodded. "I know. Do you trust him?" Corinne watched Arthur wipe food off Grace's chin with practiced ease. He was singing something off-key. Grace was laughing. "I am starting to," Corinne said. Dorothy looked at her sister. "Be careful. Please." "I will." But even as she said it, Corinne knew that being careful was becoming harder every day. Arthur was eroding her defenses simply by showing up. Simply by being present. Simply by doing the ordinary work of caring for their daughter without complaint or expectation. And some part of her did not want to be careful anymore. Some part of her wanted to take the risk. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. Arthur was teaching Grace to clap her hands when his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted. "I need to take this," he said. "Can you take her for a moment?" Corinne took Grace and watched Arthur step into the hallway. Through the closed door, she could hear his voice rising. Tense. Clipped. When he came back, his face was different. Closed off in a way she had not seen since those first days. "What is wrong?" Corinne asked. Arthur sat down heavily on the couch. My assistant called. There is a situation. My ex-fiancée has surfaced. The words hit Corinne like cold water. Your ex-fiancée. Her name is Vivian. We ended things almost 2 years ago. I thought she had moved on with her life. But apparently she saw photos of me in Colorado. Paparazzi caught me near your building a few days ago. She is asking questions. Corinne's arms tightened around Grace. What kind of questions? Who the woman is. Who the child is. Whether I am starting a new family without telling anyone. And what is she threatening? Arthur's jaw tightened. To go to the press if I do not explain myself. Corinne felt her stomach drop. This was exactly what she had feared. The complications of his world intruding on their fragile peace. Why does she care? Corinne asked. If you ended things 2 years ago. Vivian did not want me, Arthur said. She wanted my name and my money and the status that came with being attached to me. When I realized that, I ended it. She was not happy about losing access to those things. I suppose she has been waiting for an opportunity to cause problems. Corinne stood and carried Grace to the window. She looked out at the modest parking lot. The ordinary cars. The normal people living normal lives. I told you, she said quietly. I told you this would happen. That your world would find us. Arthur rose and crossed to stand beside her. You did. And I told you I would protect you both. How? Corinne turned to face him. How do you protect us from someone who wants to expose us to the press? From photographers and reporters and people who will dig into my life and find every failure and mistake I have ever made? By telling the truth, Arthur said. What? He took her hands. Corinne, I am not going to hide you. I am not going to pretend you and Grace do not exist. If Vivian wants to go to the press, let her. I will confirm everything. I have a daughter. Her mother is the woman I have been spending time with in Colorado. There is no scandal here. Just a family. Corinne stared at him. You would do that? I told you from the beginning. You are not a secret. You are not something to be ashamed of. Grace is not something to be hidden. If the world finds out about you, then the world finds out. I do not care. What about your company? Your reputation? Arthur shrugged. My company will survive. My reputation has weathered worse. And honestly, Corinne, I am tired of managing my image. I am tired of calculating how every action will be perceived. I want to live authentically, even if that means facing consequences. Grace squirmed in Corinne's arms. She was getting tired, needing a nap. Corinne looked at her daughter, at those amber eyes that were already drooping. I need to think, Corinne said. Of course. Arthur stepped back. Take whatever time you need. I am not going anywhere. He stayed for another hour, helping put Grace down for her nap. Then he left for his hotel, promising to return in the morning. Corinne sat alone in her apartment, listening to her daughter sleep, trying to understand what she was feeling. Fear. That was certainly part of it. Fear of exposure. Fear of scrutiny. Fear of having her ordinary life dragged into an extraordinary situation. But there was something else too. Something she had not expected. Pride. Arthur had not hesitated. He had not suggested hiding her or downplaying their relationship. He had not treated her like a liability to be managed. He had called them a family. And for the first time since that night in the storm, Corinne allowed herself to believe that maybe they could be. Arthur flew to New York the next morning. He called Corinne from the airport. I am going to handle this directly. Vivian wants a confrontation. Fine. I will give her one. But I will do it on my terms. What are you going to say? The truth. That I have a daughter. That I am in a relationship with her mother. That my personal life is not open for negotiation. Be careful, Corinne said. She felt strange saying it. Protective of a man she had only begun to trust. I will, Arthur replied. And Corinne, yes, thank you. For not running this time. The meeting with Vivian happened at a hotel in Manhattan. She was exactly as Arthur remembered her. Beautiful in a calculated way. Every element of her appearance designed to project power and desirability. Eyes that assessed value before seeing humanity. "So it is true," Vivian said, stirring her drink. "You have been hiding a family in Colorado. How domestic." "I have not been hiding anything," Arthur replied. "I have been building something. There is a difference." Vivian's smile thinned. "Building something with a librarian? Really, Arthur? I expected more from you." "You expected what you always expected. Money. Status. Control. You never expected me to be happy because you never believed I was capable of it. And now you are happy." Vivian laughed. "With a woman who probably never heard of you before she looked you up online?" "She did not look me up." Arthur's voice stayed calm. "She met me during a storm. She did not know my name or my net worth. She just knew I was a man who needed connection as much as she did. That is more real than anything you and I ever had." Vivian's eyes hardened. "You think this story is romantic? She left you without a word. She kept your child from you for almost a year. What kind of foundation is that for a relationship?" "A complicated one," Arthur admitted. "But complications can be worked through. Manipulation cannot. And that is all you ever offered me, Vivian. Manipulation disguised as affection. I was too wounded to see it then. I see it clearly now." Vivian leaned forward. "I could go to the press. I could tell them everything. The secret child. The ordinary woman. The great Arthur Mercer brought low by a one-night stand." "You could," Arthur agreed. "And I would confirm every word. Then I would tell them the rest. About how you tried to blackmail me. About the threats you made. About the kind of person you really are beneath all that polish." Vivian's composure flickered. "You would not try me." Arthur stood. "I am done letting fear dictate my choices. I am done protecting a reputation I no longer care about. Go to the press if you want. Tell whatever story you want to tell. I will tell mine. And we will see whose version the world believes." He walked out without looking back. When Arthur returned to Colorado, he looked different. Lighter somehow. As if he had set down a weight he had been carrying for years. "How did it go?" Corinne asked. He sat down on her couch and pulled Grace into his lap. She went immediately for his tie, trying to put it in her mouth. "She will not go to the press," Arthur said. "I called her bluff. She has too much to lose and nothing to gain by exposing something that is not actually a scandal. And if she had gone through with it, then we would have dealt with it together," Arthur said. "But I do not think it would have destroyed us. I think we are stronger than that. We." Corinne raised an eyebrow. Arthur looked at her. "Yes, we. If you will have me." Corinne did not answer immediately. She watched him holding their daughter. Watched Grace grab his finger and try to put it in her mouth too. Watched the patience in his face as he gently redirected her. "I am not ready for everything," Corinne said carefully. "I am not ready for promises or commitments or plans that extend too far into the future. I am still learning how to trust you. I am still learning how to trust myself." Arthur nodded. "I understand. But I am ready for right now," Corinne continued. "I am ready for you to keep showing up. I am ready to see where this goes." "That is enough," Arthur said. "That is more than enough." Grace made a sound that might have been agreement. They both laughed. And in that small apartment in Colorado, with the evening light fading through the windows and their daughter between them, something began to grow that had started almost 2 years earlier in a storm. Not a romance from a fairy tale. Not a love story with a guaranteed happy ending. Just two people who had found each other at the wrong time and were now trying to make it right. The months passed. Arthur made good on his promise to step back from his company. He promoted capable people to handle day-to-day operations. He flew back and forth between Colorado and Denver, slowly shifting more and more of his life westward. He found an apartment in Corinne's town. Nothing extravagant. A comfortable place where Grace could have her own room when she visited. And she did visit. More and more often. Overnight stays became weekends. Weekends became extended stays. A rhythm developed that felt less like a custody arrangement and more like a family spreading across 2 homes. Dorothy remained skeptical but less vocal about it. "He is still here," she admitted to Corinne one afternoon. 6 months and he is still here. 7, Corinne corrected. Dorothy shook her head. "I do not understand it. Men like him do not change." "Maybe he is not the man we thought he was," Corinne said. "Maybe he was always this person underneath. He just needed a reason to become it. And that reason is Grace." Corinne thought about it. Grace is part of it. But I think the bigger part is that he finally decided he wanted something different. He spent his whole life trying to prove himself to people who would never be satisfied. When he stopped doing that, he had room to become someone else. Dorothy looked at her sister. "You love him." It was not a question. Corinne did not deny it. "I am learning to. Slowly. And he loves you." "He is showing me he does. Every day." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is not nothing." "No," Corinne agreed. "It is not." Grace's first birthday arrived. Corinne had planned a small celebration. Just family. Dorothy and her husband. A few friends from the library. Arthur. But when she came downstairs that morning, she found Arthur already there. He had let himself in with the key she had given him weeks earlier. He was decorating the living room with balloons and streamers. Grace was in her high chair, watching him with fascinated eyes. "You started without me," Corinne said. "I wanted to surprise you," Arthur replied. He turned and saw her expression. "Is this okay?" "I did not mean to overstep." Corinne looked at the decorations. At the stack of presents in the corner. At the cake sitting on the counter. At the man who had done all of this before she was even awake. "It is more than okay," she said. The party was small and warm and perfect. Grace smashed her face into her cake with enthusiastic abandon. She tore paper off presents without any interest in what was inside. She laughed when people sang to her and cried when they stopped. Arthur sat beside Corinne throughout it all. Their shoulders touched. Their hands found each other occasionally. Small gestures that meant more than grand declarations. After the guests left and Grace was asleep, they sat together on the couch. "She is 1 year old," Arthur said. "I missed so much." "You did," Corinne agreed. "But you have not missed anything since you found out. That matters more." "Does it?" She turned to look at him. "It does to me. And it will to her, when she is old enough to understand." Arthur was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have been thinking about something." "What?" "I want to be legally recognized as her father. Not for custody or control. Just to make it official. So that if anything ever happens to you, she will not be left without a parent who can care for her." Corinne felt something tighten in her chest. "You want to put your name on her birth certificate. If you will allow it." She thought about what that would mean. Legal ties. Permanent connection. No going back. She thought about the man sitting beside her. The one who had shown up every day for 7 months. The one who had faced down his past for their future. The one who looked at their daughter like she was the answer to every question he had ever asked. "Yes," she said. "I will allow it." Arthur's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." He pulled her close and held her. She felt his heart pounding against her cheek. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for showing up," she replied. They stayed like that for a long time. 2 people who had found each other in a storm and had fought their way through the silence that followed. Not perfect. Not complete. But together. The legal process took several weeks. There were forms to fill out. Documents to sign. Appointments to attend. Arthur handled most of it, but Corinne was there for every step. On the day it became official, they stood outside the courthouse in the Colorado sunshine. Grace was balanced on Arthur's hip, wearing a dress Corinne had bought for the occasion. "She is mine now," Arthur said. Legally. She was always yours, Corinne replied. Arthur looked at her. And you? Corinne reached up and touched his face. The same careful touch she remembered from that night almost 2 years ago. I am getting there, she said. Arthur smiled. He leaned down and kissed her, soft and questioning, just like the first time. Grace made a sound of protest at being ignored. They both laughed. Come on, Corinne said. Let us go home. And the three of them walked toward the car together. A family that had started with a storm and grown through silence and was now building something that might last forever. Not because they were certain, but because they were willing to try. Corinne stood at the window of the new house. It was not large. 3 bedrooms, a small yard, a porch with a swing. Nothing like what Arthur could have afforded. But it was what they had chosen together. Grace was in the backyard, now 18 months old and running with the unsteady determination that characterized everything she did. Arthur was chasing her, his suit jacket discarded, his tie loosened, laughing as she evaded his grasp. Corinne watched them and felt something she had not felt in years. Peace. Not the peace of everything being perfect. Grace still got sick sometimes. Arthur still struggled with the demands of his reduced role in the company. Corinne still had moments when fear whispered that this could not last. But underneath all of that, there was something solid. Something that held. Dorothy came to stand beside her. I was wrong about him, Dorothy said. Corinne did not take her eyes off the scene in the backyard. You were cautious. That is different than wrong. I said rich men do not stay. He stayed. He did. I said people do not change. He changed. He is still changing, Corinne said. We both are. That is what this is. 2 people figuring out how to be better. Together. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You are happy. Corinne smiled. Yes, I am. In the backyard, Arthur caught Grace and swung her up in his arms. She shrieked with delight. The sound carried through the open window and filled the house with joy. Corinne walked outside to join them. Arthur looked up as she approached. His face was flushed from running. His hair was disheveled. He looked nothing like the powerful CEO she had researched online almost a year ago. He looked like a father. Like a partner. Like home. I caught her, he said proudly. You did. Grace reached for Corinne. She took her daughter and held her close, feeling the solid warmth of her small body. Arthur put his arm around them both. They stood there together as the sun began to set. A woman who had learned to stop running. A man who had learned to stay. A child who had brought them together without knowing she was doing it. Not a fairy tale. Something better. Something real. And Corinne thought about how strange life was. How a storm in Wyoming had led to this moment. How leaving without a word had led to finding something words could not describe. How a night she had tried to forget had become the foundation of everything she now held dear. She thought about all the what-ifs. What if she had stayed that morning? What if she had left a note? What if she had looked for him sooner? What if she had never found him at all? But what-ifs did not matter. What mattered was what happened next. I love you, she said. The words came out quietly. She had not planned to say them. But they were true, and she was tired of holding true things inside. Arthur went still. He turned to look at her. His amber eyes, the same ones that looked back at her from their daughter's face, were bright with emotion. Say that again, he said. I love you. He kissed her then. Not soft and questioning this time. Deep and certain. A kiss that said everything they had been building toward for months. When they finally pulled apart, Grace made a sound of impatience. They both laughed. I love you too, Arthur said. I have loved you since that night in the storm. I just did not know how to say it until now. Corinne leaned into him. His arm tightened around her. The sun continued to set. Grace babbled happily in her arms. The world kept turning, indifferent to the small miracle happening in a backyard in Colorado. But for Corinne, this was everything. This was what she had been searching for without knowing she was searching. This was what she had almost lost by running. This was what she had found by finally being brave enough to stay. Some people spend their whole lives looking for home, Corinne whispered. Arthur looked at her. And you? I found mine, she said. In a storm. With a stranger. And it turned out to be exactly where I was supposed to be all along. Grace reached for a butterfly that floated past. Her small fingers opened and closed, grasping at beauty just out of reach. Corinne watched her daughter and smiled. The storm had passed. The silence had broken. And what remained was something neither of them had expected, but both of them had needed. A family. A future. A love that had been worth waiting for. And they lived not happily ever after, because that is not how real life works, but honestly and imperfectly and together. Which was better? Which was real? Which was enough?